Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Pro Wrestling Chat. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen. Say his name, and he appears. And this time he appeared at none other than Wrestlemania. Yes, Joe Hendry, the TNA World Champion, showed up at Wrestlemania. He was the opponent of Randy Orton. Randy Orton had an open challenge, and Joe Hendry answered the call. So such a huge moment for TNA Wrestling and for Joe Hendry, of course. And let's talk about it. Now, I am not just going to sit here and brag and boast. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the negatives of this, Now, first off, I'll say the positives, and that being the fact that Joe Hendry showed up at Wrestlemania as the mystery opponent for Randy Orton, and that's awesome. He came out, had his big intro, with the music, and he had chanting his name and, singing his song, That's amazing. And, he got to soak it up, and he got to, take that long walk down the ramp, and he had, obviously you can see the TNA World Championship is prominently displayed, He even has his own, custom-made WrestleMania t-shirt, which is pretty damn cool, So that is just huge for TNA Wrestling, to get that kind of exposure on the grandest stage of them all, as they say, That is a huge platform for TNA, which generally, they get, at a pay-per-view, they might get 3,000 or 4,000 people. And the thing is, the fans already know who he is. Everybody knows who he is by now, because he's appeared in NXT a few times, and obviously appeared at the Royal Rumble earlier this year. And so all that is great. Now, I want to get into a couple of the negative things. Now, this relationship between TNA Wrestling and WWE has been great. And so much better than the relationship that AEW had with Impact Wrestling a few years back, That was just kind of abysmal. The relationship between WWE and NXT and TNA Wrestling has just been really, really good. Just light years better. But that's not to say that it's been perfect. It's not been absolutely perfect. There's just a few little nitpicks here and there that I've had, because when it comes to WWE, they know that they are by far the biggest wrestling company in the world, and that there's no one else in their league. And with that being said, they're not afraid to show that. And and I think in this case with Joe Hendry, as I felt in the Royal Rumble as well when he showed up, it was the same thing. He got to have his big entrance and come out, walk down the ramp, soak it all in. But then when he got in the ring and had the actual match with Randy Orton, he had a couple moves, and then bam, RKO. Randy Orton picks him up, RKO again, and that was it. That's it for Joe Hendry. He had his little 5 minutes in the spotlight, and that's it. Now, Joe Hendry is the world champion of TNA. How does that make the world champion of TNA look like he's not that strong, It's like Randy Orton. I love Randy Orton. He's a 14-time world champion. He's great. He's great in the ring. He's an excellent wrestler, always has been. He's been around a long time. He's getting older. He's had multiple injuries, I have no problem with Randy Orton winning at all, whatsoever. I expect him to win, but he can't at least have a halfway decent match with Joe Hendry, the TNA World Championship? Man, it's just a little bit disappointing, you know? It's like you gotta take the good with the bad kind of thing, because in the end, in the long road, the exposure that Joe Hendry got is amazing. And the exposure that TNA got as well, because they put the TNA logo up there and said TNA Champion. And that's another little thing that kind of irks me a little bit. The fact that they only say TNA Champion, not TNA World Champion, even though it says it right on his belt. World Champion. You know, it's like, it just diminishes, you know, who he is, you know. It's just a little bit disappointing. I can't help but be a little bit disappointed in the fact that they, in a way, it just kind of makes him seem weak, you know, like the TNA champion is nothing compared to the WWE champion. Randy Orton's not even a champion. He's not even United States champion or Intercontinental champion. He's just one of the wrestlers. He's certainly one of the top guys, but, you know, he doesn't have a championship, you know. And you're up against the world champion of TNA. It's like, you'd think you'd be able to have a halfway decent match. It's just, like, frustrating, you know? And it does kind of, I hate to say it, but it does kind of bring me back a little to the AEW relationship with Impact, when you had, you know, Kenny Omega kind of just running roughshod over Impact and winning all the matches and, you know, just basically running the place, you know. And then you had Tony Khan doing those commercials, talking smack and looking down at Impact Wrestling like they were just kind of this little indie company or something, you know, and they're this huge conglomerate. But I can't help but get a little bit of that here in this situation. Now, overall, the relationship between WWE and TNA has been great. You know, you had Jordan Grace showing up at the Royal Rumble, and she kicked ass, you know. And everything with Jordan Grace was handled really well. She had a fantastic match with Roxanne Perez, you know, at the pay-per-view for the NXT Championship. And that was great, you know, great exposure for TNA. And you had Joe Hendry show up on NXT. You had Frankie Kazarian show up, you know. You had Moose show up and challenge Obafemi, and they had a big match, you know, for the NXT Championship. And that's great, you know. And they had a great match. Now, as usual, TNA always seems to come up on the short end of the stick, except when it came to the Hardy Boys. You know, when they came in and had a match against Fraxium and all that. And the Hardys are currently the TNA Tag Team Champions. They were able to go over. Why? Because it's the Hardys. They have so much history with WWE. They are legends of WWE. Many, many multi-time World Tag Team Championships in WWE. So it's not far-fetched for them to win the match. You know, they're absolute legends and icons in the business, so it makes sense. They're looked at by the WWE fans as WWE royalty. But when you take someone like Moose, who's not really established in WWE, he's going to come up with the short end of the stick, even though he was the TNA X Division champion. You know, once again, you know, I can't help but be a little bit disappointed that, but again, I have to take the good with the bad, you know, I have to look at it that way, you know. As a TNA fan, it's a little bit disappointing, but at the same time, it's something that they're always going to have in their library. TNA is always going to be able to show that as part of their library of their 20-something year history, and that's something really cool, you know. Something you'll always be able to look back at, say, wow, Joe Hendry appeared at Wrestlemania. That's so much bigger than anything that happened before. You know, you had Jordan Grace in NXT and showing up at Royal. This is WrestleMania, the biggest event of the year. So that is huge, and I gotta kind of look at it that way and kind of put my little grievances aside and just celebrate the fact that Joe Hendry appeared at WrestleMania, and it was really, really cool. But, you know, like I said, it has not been a perfect relationship. TNA still has kind of come up on the short end of the stick, but, you know, just the exposure is great, you know. That's the thing, you know. Maybe at some point Joe Hendry will have his moment in the sun and have an actual good match with someone in WWE, you know. Because I have a feeling he might show up again. I know he really wants to go against John Cena. That's his big dream match, and he even spoke with John Cena about it. Maybe he spoke with him again about it because they were at the same event, you know. Maybe he chatted with John Cena backstage again, you know, because John Cena had the main event match against Cody Rhodes, of course. Now, with that being said, let me just talk a little bit about WrestleMania. I thought it was a fantastic show overall. I think it was one of the best WrestleManias I've seen in a while. Night 1, Saturday, the match with CM Punk, Seth Rollins, and Roman Reigns was just fantastic. One of the best triple threat matches I've ever seen. Just from a drama standpoint, I mean, the drama with Paul Heyman, you know, who's he going to go with? Because he kind of betrayed Roman Reigns by coming out with CM Punk. But, you know, that was kind of the favor that he was giving CM Punk, you know, because he was his manager in the past. So it was like, he's just kind of doing him a favor. But in the end, is he going to go with, you know, Roman Reigns at the end of the day? Is he going to screw over CM Punk? But then you have Seth Rollins in the equation. It's like, I love the way that all played out. It was so dramatic. It's like, I love it. Who's he going to go with? You know, you see him grabbing the chair. He's going to hit him. He's going to... It was so great. I loved it. And great match with, you know, Charlotte Flair and Tiffany Stratton. That did not disappoint, and it was great to see Tiffany Stratton retain, you know, and earn her championship reign as the women's WWE World Champion. Yeah, I think she did a great job, and it was great at the end. You know, she was all beat up. She kind of busted a tooth there, and I was like, yeah, I love that, you know. Had some great matches. And then night 2 had some great matches as well. A couple of really cool surprises. Like, I was very surprised that Damian Priest's match with Drew McIntyre, you know, that Sin City street fight, they called it. Ended up being, like, an awesome match. Like, really physical, really intense. Like, there was one spot where Damian Priest was doing the Undertaker thing, walking on the top rope and ready to drop the hammer smash, and then Drew just kind of pushed him off the top rope and he landed into all the tables. And like, that was one of the coolest spots I've seen in a while, man. That was awesome. And then Drew, when he DDT'd Damian Priest onto the steel steps, and it looked like Drew really hurt his own back doing that, and he did that a couple times. So very physical match, and I was very surprised. I think that was kind of the sleeper hit of Night 2 of WrestleMania. And another cool thing about that is Kerry King from Slayer showed up. My favorite metal band of all time. Slayer. Playing the intro for Damian Priest. I thought that was so damn cool. I only wish that the entire band was there. That would have been even better, but just the fact that Kerry King showed up was really cool. And the funny thing is, probably the worst match of the night was John Cena versus Cody Rhodes. Was not a match, was not a 5-star match by any means. But at the same time, I liked John Cena's, like, game plan that he had, you know. He was switching it up. He had a much different approach than he's using in the past, like really slowing down the pace. And yeah, he definitely approached the match with a much different style. I like how he came out and it was kind of a no-frills entrance. I mean, you heard the music, but it was just plain logo John Cena all in black, and there's nothing, no color, and he's always a colorful guy with all the colorful costume. And he just kind of had the black shirt and nothing spectacular, and he came out, just doing his thing, but he was very much slowing down the pace, kind of methodical, and I kind of like that, it was something different, but it wasn't like a match that anyone's going to go back to and say, oh, that was a great match, You had a little bit of outside interference with Travis Scott, and he helped him get the win, and, John Cena bashed him with the title belt, did his move there, and that was pretty much it, John Cena, number 17 championship, 17-time WWE champion. That is impressive, boy. That is very impressive. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out going forward. Seeing John Cena, run roughshod all over the WWE, with the championship. Let's see. I'm very interested in to see what he does or where this goes, and it's heartbreaking for Cody Rhodes. More than a year, anyway. It's kind of sad in a way, but I think it's great for John Cena to finally, break that record. Ric Flair's the 16-time champion, but now John Cena broke that record, so it's pretty awesome, It's a great way to go out for Cena. He had an incredible career, and he's ending it with a bang. Something very interesting. Turning heel, that's something that nobody ever thought he would do, and he picks his last year in wrestling to do that. But, we got plenty of time left in the year, so there's a lot that can happen, between now and December, I mean, we don't know when he's actually going to call it a day, but I imagine he could run out the rest of the year until December or so. At some point he's going to drop the title, obviously. Probably be back to Cody Rhodes at some point, but there's going to be a lot of drama, a lot of build-up, but yeah. Overall, I thought it was a really good show, both nights. They both had great matches. I think probably more great matches on night one overall, but a lot of great spectacle on night two. But, yeah. Alright, guys, that's going to do it for this edition of the Pro Wrestling Chat. Tune in and lock up.